Hey guys, so this is one of my favorite tools, my Elmira wood stove, and we used it in our big 2,300 square foot house, and it heated the whole house. It cooked for us, and we just adore it. Now that we're in the tiny house, I use the propane attachment here for our winter cooking. It has warming ovens, it has a real baking oven, but currently I'm using my rocket mass heater because it's more efficient, and because instead of having a big fire that goes up and down according to whether or not there's a fire going, the rocket mass heater runs residual heat out. It absorbs the heat and then it lets it go out over time. And the other thing is, you don't burn yourself on the rocket mass heater because it's surrounded by mass, it's surrounded by aircrete. This stove is fantastic. It's fantastic for cooking. It is fantastic for warming your home, especially if it's really cold outside, but it doesn't have a heat sink with it, so you have to run it all the time. One of the struggles we had was that in order to let the heat come down a little bit at night so we weren't roasting in our beds, we would damp the stove down, which means we would have a creosote buildup because it was not burning efficiently. It didn't have enough oxygen. We had to clean this stove pipe out every 6 weeks in order to keep from having chimney fires. I do not have to do that on my rocket mass heater because my double wall chimney is filled with aircrete. The smoke in the rocket mass heater isn't really smoke. It's warm air that's left over from the almost complete combustion inside the burn chamber, inside the part that rockets. But you still need to have some exhaust, and you have water vapor, and you have a little bit of exhaust left that you don't want in your house. So we have to have a chimney on a rocket mass heater, obviously. We have to have motion with that heat. So fast forward to our rocket mass heater. This rocket mass heater has been in the cabin since last summer, and it is 2.0. The first time we put it in, it didn't work. It didn't work as well as a regular wood stove. We were having fluing problems, and we couldn't use the mass bench again because of those fluing problems. So what I wanted to walk through is the Elmira versus the Pioneer Princess versus our rocket mass heater, and kind of give you a comparison between them of how well they functioned for what I was using them for and what makes them function at their best. How to be most efficient, how to be user friendly, how to be safe. So with this rocket mass heater, it's a little bit special because the burn chamber itself is surrounded by aircrete. And this is a shroud for pea gravel. This is the heat riser itself on the inside, this pretty chrome. And around here, we have pea gravel, and this holds it in. So that when the fire's going, the heat is going into the pea gravel. And the heat is going into the aircrete that here is surrounding the heat box. The front part of the stove doesn't really get hot. Most of the heat happens right here in this area. And so if a child was to bump against this, what they would feel is a warm surface or maybe a hot surface, but not a burning surface. The same thing is true of the front of the door area. It doesn't get hot because all the burning happens back here. This is where all the oxygen goes in and where it just really gets hot. This surface we are able to cook with. We have a little rocket, what do we call it, our aircrete oven. We have an aircrete oven that sits on the top of this in the winter, and what that does is it creates another heat sink so that when we're actually baking in it, we don't get baked out of the house. The extra heat that isn't cooking whatever's in the oven is actually going again into the aircrete oven. So it actually lowers the temperature of the cabin rather than increasing the temperature of the cabin when we're baking, which is amazing. What's the other thing I want to talk about with this? This is quite efficient. We go through about 3 logs this size in a day, cut into 4 pieces each because they're very tiny. The firebox in here is only this big and runs all the way back. And so, so it doesn't take a lot of wood. You can't put a lot of wood in it at one time, and the heat that comes off the stove goes into the bench. It also goes into here, it also goes into here. So this is really just a huge heat sink stove. It has 3 different sources of material for that heat to sink into, and then really slowly. When we have really cold nights and cold days, generally what will happen, I'll let the fire go out at about 10. I need it to be slowing down to about this point. You see how slow that fan is? That's where I want it to be at about 10 o'clock at night. And then I don't put any more wood in. And we close everything down so that the heat isn't going up the chimney. And we wake up in the morning to about 72 degrees. And I have very heavy curtains that I put on the windows, blackout type curtains at night. And sometimes at night, even at that point, we open the window in the attic a little bit and let some of that heat escape, and then we close it a little bit later at night because it keeps us very warm. The one downside of our cabin that makes it a little bit hard for us to determine real numbers on comfort and heat in the cabin is that our floor is completely uninsulated. It's just plywood. We didn't insulate it when we brought the cabin out, and it means that your feet are cold and the rest of you's warm if you're not wearing shoes in the winter. And you know, it's nice that heat rises, but I'm sure that we do have a heat loss through the floor in the winter. We are not using hardwood. We are using softwood. We use Douglas fir, we use pine a lot, and we use a little bit of Russian olive. But Russian olive is the only one there that's a hardwood, and it's a smelly trash wood, so we don't like to burn it. So we do burn softwoods, and we have had no creosote buildup inside the stove or in the chimney or in the bench, which is a really big deal. The reason that the rocket mass heater works is because of the aircrete chimney. It's a double wall pipe that has aircrete poured into it in sections, and it's a nice tall chimney. It's I think it's, how many feet is it? Because they're 3 feet sections, and I think we have 4, so 3 times. It's a 12-foot chimney. We do have it run out of the window, and it is an insulated box that is in the window that the pipe runs through. So instead of it just being sheet metal or something that it goes through, it's an insulated aircrete box that the chimney runs through. And there's lots of kinks and turns and twists and everything in our pipe, but it doesn't matter because the aircrete chimney just sucks everything out, and it works so well. What I would recommend to those of you, at least in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, one thing that I would be really curious to find out is if somebody put one of those aircrete chimneys on a conventional stove, if you could get rid of all creosote, because it is so efficient. It doesn't let the cold air from the outside get through the chimney and cause back puffing, and it just, I would be fascinated to know that. I've only ever used it on the rocket stove. So hopefully this helps. I know a lot of people out there really want a cook stove, that it just is part of their dream, and it is a wonderful thing. I have a non-conventional wood stove, and I have an oven that goes on top of it for cooking in the winter, and I think that's the best of both worlds. I can put my yogurt around in different spots knowing what temperature it is, and I can also take my aircrete oven off the top and put it out on the deck on the propane in the summer, so it's universal. When I'm off grid, I can bake outside in the summer, I can bake inside in the winter. And so even though I love my Elmira, and you can see I haven't sold it, I still have it, I love it. My tool of choice is definitely the rocket mass heater. The look of the Elmira is wonderful and beautiful and aesthetic. If you could find a way to run your Elmira through a heat bank, some kind of heat sink, I think that would be ideal, just because with a regular wood stove, all your heat goes up the chimney. If you're not looking at an oven, at a stove that has an oven, and you just want a conventional stove, you still are having the same problem. You're spending less money on a conventional stove that's like the little square box and everything. But you still have the fact that the smoke is, the fire is here, the chimney's here, he wants to rise, so heat's going to go up the chimney. Whereas this, the heat goes down first through the bench and then up through the chimney after passing through several heat sinks. So that's just my take on it. You can get wood stoves anywhere. You can find them on Craigslist, and they will keep you warm in the winter, and that is what you want. That is what counts. It's good to have a wood stove. Just know that if you're going to be buying your wood, generally in our area it's 165 a cord cut, and if you're going to do it yourself, you need the chainsaw, you need the splitting maul, you need the all these other things that you need. And most of the wood that I got was from tree service companies. I would call and ask them if I could have their wood, if I could come out where they were cutting and harvest it, because they cut it into sections, and I would come and I would get free wood that way. and then we would just let it sit for a couple years, and then I split it or John would split it. We had 2 years when John's back was hurt that we brought in a log splitter, and that was fine and dandy and okay, but I prefer to split my own wood. I prefer to split it to the size I want, and I prefer to do it every day. The reason is I enjoy the exercise. I think that it's valuable in the winter to have a way to go out and build up a sweat and get your heart rate up. So if you're going to get something off Craigslist and it's a cheap $200 stove, just know it's probably going to have cracks in it that you're going to need to have fixed. If it doesn't have cracks in it, it's going to cost you just a little bit more. If you go in and get a stove at a fancy stove place, your probably starting price for something is going to be $2,500. And they'll say that they're more efficient, but remember, if the fire's here and the chimney's here, the heat is still going up the chimney. And so you're going to have smoke, and you're going to have a lot of wood going into that stove. And I would choose to have a regular wood stove rather than no stove at all. I would definitely choose that. But now that I have this gem, it's kind of taken me to another level. I really appreciate the fact that I'm not going through a lot of wood, that it doesn't overheat my tiny space. This is a 350 square foot cabin, and this stove, I can control it so that it's warm, or it's cooler, or it's hot, or it's baking something, or it's going through the bench. I can control all that, but the heat stays in the cabin. So if you have a lot of wood on your property, if you already have a chainsaw, a regular wood stove will work really well for you. Just so you know, the aircrete oven that I use can be used on a conventional stove. You just put the oven on top of your stove and put a pizza stone in, one of those pizza stones that will prevent your stove from burning the bottom of your pans. So that's what you would need. I have a little platform that sits on top of my stove that if you didn't have that, it wouldn't really work very well on a rocket stove or any other stove. You have to have some kind of buffer. And then that platform also works perfectly out on my propane. So if you haven't checked out the Honeydew Carpenter and seen the projects he's working on, he is working on trying to get a PDF up of his stove that you could take to a local welder machinist and show them, this is the plan I want, this is how I want it built, and then you could pour your own aircrete into it to create your insulation layer. He used mostly recycled goods. This is a 50-gallon drum. This is from a water heating tank, I believe. And this down here is the second half of that water heating tank. And everything here he got from a trash yard in order to make it. If you're interested in the Elmira stove, which I do love to pieces, you can see I still have it. It's a fantastic stove. Or in the Pioneer Princess, we will put a link in the description below for Layman's Catalog. They carry these stoves. We are not affiliates right now, but we're hoping to be affiliates because we think that their tools are brilliant and amazing. And hopefully this video helped you if you're interested in homesteading, if you're interested in livestock or recipes for soap or for goat cheese. We try to keep them stocked over on Artsy Store. If you are interested in a blog about wood stoves, I just put a blog up on dirtpatcheaven.com. And we appreciate you watching, and if you have any questions about wood stoves, make sure to let me know, and we'll talk to you later. I love wood stoves. I have had wood stoves since I was about 12 when my parents moved into their passive solar, active solar home. We had a Pioneer Princess, and it was a great stove. And it really took the chill off on those cold winter mornings. We still used propane because our house was quite large, and it did not heat our whole house. We had a 5,500 square foot house, farmhouse, when I was a kid, and it was very hard for that one wood stove to keep everything warm. In our 2-story house, it was 2,300 square feet. Our Elmira did a fantastic job of keeping everything warm. It also has this propane attachment that allows you to cook in the summer or in the winter on it if you choose. You can bake in it. It has warming ovens, and it even comes with a heat shield on the back. That means that you don't have to put in a fire resistant wall behind it because the chimney has another layer of protection that keeps it from overheating the wall. The one downside of conventional ovens is that or conventional stoves is that you can still get creosote buildup if you damp them down to a comfortable living temperature. And that really is the drawback. We had to clean our stove here every 6 weeks. When I was a kid, I I think we cleaned it once a year because it had a very long draft, and we didn't damp it down. With our Pioneer Princess, we didn't damp it down because it was trying to heat such a huge amount of space that we really couldn't damp it down and have everything stay warm. With this one, we did have to damp it down. It was the perfect size stove for our house, but at night you want a cooler temperature, and you still want the stove to keep you warm at night, especially if it's like negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to still stay warm, but I don't know, we struggled with this with Creosote Buildup. We needed a longer chimney, but because of high winds in our area, a chimney that was 16 feet above the roof of the house was not a reasonable thing to do, so instead we cleaned the chimney every 6 weeks.